So guys, remember what we discussed last class? Routing. Protecting, I mean, we discussed about how to create routes, how to protect them using route guards, I mean, auth guards. What else? Is that it? And reading values from a form. Yeah. Right. Okay. I asked you guys to create the login and complete that flow. Are you guys able to do that? Everyone? Yeah. Okay. So let's see what, I mean, I haven't done that in mine. So what are we trying to do right now is, if you just give admin, when you click on save or when you click on submit, it should take you to your home component, right? So to do that, let me just quickly do that here. So this is my HTML page. We already have an event binding that's written, that's login. And when I click on that, it is able to read the values using this object, which is auth, right? So this is our auth service. I'm going to very quickly create one function called login here, which just, I'm expecting, and this function will have an object. I'm just going to name that as credentials. And I'm just checking if credentials dot username equals admin and credentials dot password equals admin. Right. So then else I have to just alert them by just saying please enter valid details, and then I'm just saying return false. So if this matches, I have to like take the control from this page or from the login page to the welcome page, right? So how do I do that? I can just get the access of the router. So I'm just saying import router from Angular / router. I can just inject this right here. I'm just saying private router equals this. I can use this instance and I can call a method called navigate to take the control to that page. I'm saying this dot router dot navigate. I want to take it to welcome. This is what I asked you guys to do, right? So now imagine this should work if I haven't made any typo. Let's try. So I'm just saying admin. When I click submit, there is an error that I made. So let's see what that is. Oops. Oh, I'm not calling this function inside this. So let me just call that within the login component. So I'm just saying import auth service from service. Let's create an instance. And let me just use it here. This dot auth service dot login. This dot auth. Now this should work, hopefully. Let's try admin. Okay, I'm in this page, right? So from the login page, I was able to manage. I managed to take my control to the home page after validating the details. So if I go and refresh this page, do you guys able to make sure that the user is logged in or not? Are you storing that state somewhere in this case? Where? So from this page, like from here, I kind of navigated from the login page. So I have given credentials like admin, and I click submit. At that point, I know the user is logged in because we checked the validity. So we click submit. From there, I landed upon the welcome page. So if I make a page refresh, it's a complete, loading of that entire application again. So in that point, is there a way to understand that the user is logged in? Is there a way to find out the user is logged in? No, right? because if that has to happen, it has to go through again through the login page. So we are not saving the state anywhere within the application. So that should not be the case. So in that case, what you could probably do is, so in a production environment, what you probably do is you make an API call to the server, you pass its credentials, you cross-check with the database, and if you find a match, you send a response back saying that, okay, this user is a valid user, right? So then it is completely up to the client to remember that state that the user is logged in, the status of the user. That's a valid authenticated user. So for that, there are two different ways you can manage to do that. Either you can rely on cookies to store that information saying that the user is logged in, or you can rely on the storage API to store that flag saying that the user is logged in. So normally you make use of like some tokens, which you can create using auth library or using JSON Web Tokens, which I'll show you in a later class for sure. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to directly rely on the storage API. Obviously, I have to I have to make this available permanently, so I'm going to rely on local storage. So I'm just saying local storage dot set item, and I'm going to set a flag. I'm just saying is logged in. I'm going to give the value as true. So it is showing error. That is because we can only store string within local storage. So it is Boolean. So I'm just going to change that to string. So now the error is gone. So now once the entire activity, the login activity happens, you're not only making sure that the user is authenticated, you're also saving that state to your local storage, right? So at any point of time, if I make a page refresh, if I want to make sure the user is logged in, I can directly go and check in my local storage, right? So here again, instead of directly hard coding the value as true, now I can directly get it from the local storage. I'm saying local storage dot get item. I can just give it as logged in. So whatever value that's been stored in your storage, helps me to understand, or helps the system to understand if the user is an authenticated user or not. Is that clear? The change that I just made, everyone? Okay. So now let's try this and see whether it works. So I'm just going back to this login. In my application local storage, I don't have anything. So I'm giving admin, click submit. It did save a flag into my local storage. So now if I go and try products, I'm able to view this. So if I delete this value from local storage and if I refresh, it goes back to the login page. So now it's not relying on that hard-coded value. It is completely relying on the storage API. Any question there? Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that this welcome page also is accessible only if the user is logged in. So for that, I can just directly go to the routing right here, and I can just use this guard for the welcome as well. So I'm just going to quickly provide this here. All right. So let's close this. So now let's do that again. Come on, why is it taking so long to load? Oh, I think it landed up in a recursive loop or something. Oops. Where is app routing? Oh yes, inside the auth guard, I believe it should be to the login. It was just going on a recursive loop. I believe I have to start my server. Come on, I did start the server. Okay. All right, so now let's try it here. I'm in my login page. I don't have anything right here, so I'm just saying admin. If I click submit, I'm in my welcome page. From there, I'm able to navigate to the products page. Everything is working fine. So the only problem is when I land upon this welcome page directly after login, I have to remember all the links, which if I have to navigate through the different components, I have to remember how can I get to the welcome page. It's by using the URL pattern, which is /welcome. If it is for products, it has to be /products, right? So obviously we need a better solution for this. So that's when we think of having these navigation bar, and we provide all the links that the user can navigate across my application, right? So I'm just going to quickly create one navigation bar. I'm just creating a component for it. I'm just saying ng component. Let it be inside miscellaneous / navigation bar. So I just created a component. What was that? Oh yeah. So ng g. Yeah, I forgot the g. All right. So now I just created it. So let me just close everything right here. So let's just open the navigation component that I just created, which is right here. And this is the default content for it. And this is the app component. So like you can directly create it from the scratch, or you can just directly go to getbootstrap.com and get some static, like what do you call that, template from it. So I'm just going to navigation bar. So if we scroll down, you have all these navigation bars. Let's scroll down and we just copy this. I'll take this navigation bar as my component template. So I'll put this. Let me just remove the things that I really don't need. So I don't need this. Neither I don't need this. Let me just get rid of this. So in this navigation bar, I'm going to provide links like one for home, next one for accessing my products page. So let this be home. Let this be products, and one more I need, that is for logout, and one more here I'm just giving it for login. So these are the links that I have in my navigation bar: one for login, one for logout, one for accessing my home page, and one for accessing my products page. So if I have to, I cannot provide href for navigating across my components in Angular 2. So how do I provide the capability for navigating across pages using an anchor tag? You use a property binding, which is router link, and for home it will be welcome. I'm going to do the same thing for products. So this will be products, and this will be again login. And I don't have a page called logout, or I don't have a route configuration called logout. So we'll handle that later. So let it be like that. So now I created the component. I need to include this somewhere. Where do you think I have to go and include this? So this is my page right here. And I want the navigation bar within this page. And it should be available in all the pages. So if I go to the login page, I need to have the navigation bar. If I go to the products page, if I go to the welcome page, I still need to have the navigation bar.
Yeah.
Right. So the one place where I can just go it, where I can just place it globally is going to be my the app component. So I'm going to directly put it here. I'm just saying app-navbar. So just place this, and I have the navigation bar right here. And I have all the links. I have home, then products, login, and here I have the logout. Right. So obviously I'm in my locked out state. If I go and check my local storage, yeah. Let me just close this. So if imagine I'm in the locked out state. If I'm in the logged out state, I should not be able to view these pages, which is home and products, and even the logout. I should be able to view those pages only if I'm logged in. And if I am logged out, I should be seeing only this link, which is login. So how do you toggle that elements using or relying on the state of or status of the user? So we are talking about two different states here. One is logged in, and the next one is logged out. So we have to like make our navigation bar dynamic based on these two states of the user. So what do you think I have to do in this page, which is right here? But this is a template, obviously. So what do you think I have to do to make that happen? What do I do for this inside NGF? If there is a user, so we already have a service which helps us to do that, which is auth service. And here I already have a function called check login. So if I call check login, it will return me the value, which will help me to understand if the user is logged in or not, right? So I can directly use that, or I can at least think of using that. Okay, so now let me just go to the navigation bar component right here. And here I'm just creating a variable called user status, which is going to be of type Boolean. And let me just assume that the value is false initially. And I'm just importing my auth service here from // oh, was it in the same thing? Okay, right here I have auth, then auth service. Let me get an instance of this dot, oops, private auth service was this. And in my ng on init, I can just write this dot user status equals this dot auth service dot check login, right? So do you think, I mean, any idea why this error is just showing here? Right, this function is going to return us a string. That is just because it is directly reading the value from the local storage. By default, it will be string, and we are expecting a value which is Boolean here. So what you could probably do is, like, you can directly use that string and convert that into a Boolean by just evaluating the value, the return value of this function. So you can, the simplest possible approach will be to use JSON.parse. Let's provide this. So it will parse that value. So if it is a string which is false, it will convert that into Boolean, false. Right, so now I have a variable which helps me to understand the state. So let's go here and just go back to this navbar. And here I can write ng if this. If that is true, I need to show home, which means the user is logged in. I can do the same thing for products. I can do the same thing for login, not login, sorry, for logout. I can also do the same thing for login, but it has to be not. So if it is false, it will show that item, a menu item. So now let's go back into this page, and you can see that all the other links are gone because local storage doesn't have any state, and you cannot see the links home and products, right? So let's try logging in. So I'm just saying admin. If I click submit, right now I have this is logged in flag, and still you don't see anything right here. But if I make a page refresh, I'll get this data. I'll get the real items. I have home, products, and I also have logout here. But it requires me to refresh the page, right? So again, the same thing happens if I delete this. If I go to products, it is still visible. If I refresh, it still brings me to the logged out state. And that reflects in my navigation bar as well. But still, it requires a page refresh. So how can I get rid of that page refresh? I cannot afford to have the page refresh when we are working with single page applications, right? The reason why we are moving into that single page application architecture is just because to reduce the number of HTTP requests. So again, we are still going back into the same old architecture, which is not good. We cannot afford to have a page refresh just to make something working in our application. So the thing that we are trying to solve here is, if you have understood, so here we have a login page, right? So we give the credentials. When you click submit, you're doing some activity and you're updating the local storage, right? But for some reason, that is not reflecting in this component called navigation bar. So we're talking about two different components here. The first one is navigation bar, and the second one is login component. So somehow, whenever anything happens in one component, I want to like kind of propagate that to a different component and let the component know that, okay, this is the current state of the user. Understood? So if it was nested, you can directly use input and output decorator to communicate between components. Right now, we are not working with nested components. Instead, we are working with components at the same level, which is siblings. So there has to be some way to communicate between sibling components. If it was AngularJS, you directly tend to use broadcast, emit, and on. The only thing is you just have to write it to the root scope. So then it will be like propagated across your application, and whoever wants to listen to that can listen to that. So the alternative here is something called observables. So you can rely on observables to emit data, and whoever wants to consume it can consume it. That's how it is. So to work with observables, there are different approaches in Angular. Not in Angular, basically, there is a library called RxJS. So RxJS is a library which kind of took this thing a little bit forward, and they created all these helper functions to work with observable. So obviously, to work with observable using RxJS in our Angular project, you do have something called a service called subject. So you can use the service called subject, which will help you to work with the observable concept. So do you remember what observable was, and how is it different from a promise? We discussed in the previous session, right? So the main limitation of promise was just one response, but here it is not really limited to one response, which means right now when I go and click on this, it can emit one value. The same activity has to happen again when I click on logout, because in that case it has to set it to false and it has to propagate that message again. So if you rely on promise, that is not going to happen. But here, since it is observable, it can emit multiple values, and the observer can listen to that responses as well. So it's basically an observable and an observer. Like you emit an observable, and some observer is like listening to that event. Two entities. All right, so let's see how exactly we can do that. So this is the service where all the activities are happening. So when I give my credentials here, when I click on submit, it is calling one function within the auth service, which will actually logs that user in, right? So here, the moment that this activity happens, which is navigating the user to the welcome page, I have to propagate a message saying that, okay, the user is currently logged in. So the way that you can do it, as I said, you can rely on the what do you call that? The concept called observable. And to access observable object, you can use something called subject. It's called subject, which is available in the library, which is RxJS. That is automatically pre-built into your Angular application, so you don't have to really require the dependency. It's automatically available. So once you have this, you can create an instance of this, just like you create an instance of an event emitter. You create an instance of your subject, and you can work with subject. So remember, you created an instance of event emitter, and you call the method called emit so that the parent can listen to that. Something very similar. So you just create an instance here. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm just saying auth. And it's just a naming convention. Whenever a variable is holding an instance of an observable, to differentiate between other variables, you can give a dollar symbol here. So anywhere in your application, if you see a variable that has a prefix $, which means that that variable is expecting, or that variable is actually holding an instance of observable. It's just a naming convention. You can use it, not use it. So I'm just storing an instance of subject right here. So within the service class, I do have an access to a variable called subject, which actually holds an instance of the observable. So now, how do I use this? Now, the only thing that you have to do is you just get the reference of this variable within the function right here. And I'll just say this dot that variable, and you can call one function called next. So just use dot next, and you can pass in the value. So I'm just using this function right here. I'm just saying whatever this function is going to return me, I'm going to just send it across. So now the complete flow is I give username and password here, click on submit. It comes here, it checks the validity, and immediately sends observable across my application, and it redirects the user to the welcome page, right? So the next thing is, how exactly can my navigation bar listen to this, right? So this is where my navigation bar is. And here also I need to import the same auth service to get the reference of the subject that we just created. So I'll just import my auth service. Oh, it's already imported, so don't need that. Here, what I can do is right now we're just relying on this return value of check login, right? So instead of this, let me just comment this code. What do I do is I'll just write this dot auth service dot, I'll get access to this variable called $auth. So what is this variable holding? It's actually holding an instance of observable, which means if you want to get data from it, you can actually subscribe to it. So you just say dot subscribe, and you'll get the data right here. And once the data is received, you can actually set it to this variable called user status, which has been used in your template to toggle between the different states or different menu items. You can just say just dot status equals JSON dot dot pass data. That's why is it showing that error? Oh yeah, I just have to give a data type of any. So is that clear? Let's see whether it works. So let me just go in here. Right now we don't have any data, so I'm just giving admin. I click submit. It went into this logged in, but for some reason it didn't get through. So let me just check whether it is available here. So I'm just saying console.log. They're able to get this. Let's me just delete this. Okay. Say admin, click submit. Wait, return null for some reason. Why is that? Just check. This is my auth service. I'm just saying this dot auth service dot next. Check this dot login. It is correct. Clicking on subject. Okay, let's try that once again. Some admin. Yeah, now I got it true. So I got the value as true, and it immediately changed the menu items as well. Right. So now there is one more limitation. I'll get into that in a moment. So now let's go back into the navigation bar, and let's try to implement the logout functionality also. So I'm just giving, we already gave a logout link here. So if I have to make that working, what do you think I have to do to make logout working? Because we don't have a navigation or a routing which is written for logout. So the only activity that when I click on logout that happens is it has to clear whatever data that we are using to make the user keep logged in, and then redirect the user back to the login page. So two things. The first thing is I have to capture that event. So I'm just writing an event handler here. So I'm just saying click. I'm just saying logout. So let me just get rid of this anchor tag. I don't need, href tag. I don't need this. So I'm going to create a function right here. So I'm just saying logout. I'm not going to write any logic here, since instead I'm going to just completely move that into my auth service. So I'm just saying this dot auth service dot. I don't have a function called logout, but we'll create that. Right. So I have to go and create this method within my auth service right here. So I'm just saying logout. What do you think I have to do here within this function? No. Remove the value from the local storage. So I can directly write local storage dot remove item. Just remove that flag which is logged in. At the same time, I have to redirect the user to the login page. So I'll just write this dot router dot navigate login. That's all we have to do for the logout activity to work. At the same time, if you notice one thing, when I log out, I also have to change the menu items. So when I click log out, it has to toggle back to the logged out state. So what do you think I have to do? Again, send one more observable, message through that observable. So we already have one variable that holds that. So I'm just using the same variable. So it becomes this dot $auth dot next. I'm just setting that to false. So now again, a message is propagated across my application. So now subscribing to that message, we'll understand, okay, the user is logged out, so I have to go and change the menu items. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Theory is good. Let's see whether it works.
Can you explain how you did the login? I mean, you told that this dot next of this dot log check login.
Huh.
So I mean, what do you pass in the next?
What do you pass in the what?
In the next, I mean, you pass this dot check login.
Ah, that will be the return value of this function.
Return value.
Yeah, when I see, basically I'm calling that function, right? So whatever that function is going to return me is what exactly that I pass as the value for the next method. So check login is going to return me whatever value that is available in this local storage property. If it is there, it will return that value, otherwise it will return undefined. So let's go back into this login page. Let me just clear everything that I have in my local storage. I'm just clicking this. So right now I don't have anything. So I'm just writing admin, and I click submit. Come on, why is it not working at the first time? Just refresh this again. where is navigation component? Is this getting called? Oh yeah, it could be because let's go to the auth service. Yeah, I'm just using check login even before writing the data. So I have to like put this thing as first. Even before writing the data into the local storage, I was just trying to read the value. That's a problem. So let's try deleting that again. Let's go to the login. Now let's try admin. So now when I logged in, it immediately logged me to navigated me to the welcome page, and I do have home products and logout link. So now when I click on logout, it took me back to the login page, and it also toggled a menu, right? So that complete activity is working correctly now. You can log in, it toggles the menu, everything is working. But there is one small limitation with subject. That's the only limitation that you have with subject is it cannot have an initial value. So which means when you create the subject right here, which is this, it cannot take in any initial value. So what exactly do I mean by that? I'll show you in a moment. So imagine I logged in, clicked on submit, everything is working fine. The only problem is when I go and refresh this page, can you see the menu bar? That state is gone. That is just because subject doesn't hold any initial value. So if this has to toggle again, that whole either a logout activity or a login activity has to happen again. Only then we are propagating the message, right? So you understood that? So if this subject has to propagate a message or send a message, that either a login activity or a logout activity has to happen. That is just because the subject doesn't have an initial value. It cannot hold an initial value. So that is one limitation that you have with subject. So how do you solve this? Instead of subject, you can use another one called behavior subject. Anywhere in this case, which is obvious, we need to have an initial value for your observable that you're creating. So since subject cannot hold any initial value, you can directly replace it with behavior subject. You can copy this, you create an instance of behavior subject instead of subject. In this case, it is showing an error that is just because you're supposed to pass an initial value for the behavior subject. So, and what do I pass? I'll just directly check. I'll just call this function. I'll just say this dot check login. That's all I do. So whatever value that's been set in my local storage, I'll set it as initial value for it. So even if I make a page refresh, it will still read the value from the local storage and set it to that observable. Understood? So wherever it's been subscribed, it will read the value, or it will get the value from the local. So if I go and make a page refresh now, it still remembers my state. So let's try to log out that and just try that again. So I'm trying, let's refresh this. I'm trying admin, let's click submit. I have home products and logout. I'll make a page refresh. It still has a value. If I go to products page, everything is working. Even if I do this here, it still works. And if I click logout from here, it takes me back to the login page. So it's not mandatory that you need to use behave subject in almost everywhere. Wherever you need to have, you need the observer to have an initial value, you can think of using behavior subject. Any other cases, you can go with subject. It's just the same. It's the only difference that you have between subject and behavior subject. Both are services that RSGS library offers to work with observers. Is that clear, that concept? That's how you can implement communication between sibling components. Just subject, basically observable in the end. So if you're working with nested components, the way that you can use component interaction is by using input and output decorator. If not, if it is sibling, you can directly use your observable through subject or behavior subject. Is that clear, guys?
Is this work only with the local storage or any other database?
I didn't get you.
So if I have the same users in my backend with the amount of any other, so I can make the use of the observable to get
right. No. It's basically observable is a concept that you can apply. It's just a concept in your language. Like if you are using the same language set in your server, obviously maybe you should be able to use that. But from this client's perspective, you cannot use observable to communicate with the server. Understood what I'm trying to say? So what you can do is, like, even though this data is not in your local storage, let's imagine you're not storing the data in your local storage. To know whether the user is logged in, you have to each and every time you have to make an API call to the server. Just imagine a scenario like that. So what will happen? So this local storage dot get item or set item will become an async activity. right? So you'll obviously have to make an API call to the server, and once you get the response, you'll subscribe to that observable. Within that, you have to emit one more observable.
Yeah.
Understood that picture?
So where JWT tokens come in?
Exactly, I'll show you what that is. So now, right, see, imagine right now when I log in, everything is happening within the client. We don't have any kind of interaction with the server. In a production environment, what exactly you'll do is, instead of making this condition right here, you make an API call to the server. You do the exact same thing by cross-checking with your database. You run a query saying that db dot, let's say, users dot find, where username equals this and password equals so and so. And once that query is going to return me an object, which means you are able to find a matched user, which means that credentials are valid, right? So then you have to send a response back to the client saying that, okay, this user is logged in. But that response won't be just true or false. If you just send true or false, the next time when I refresh that page, the client doesn't know which user this is, whether it's Neil or whether it's you or whether it's me, I don't know, or the system doesn't understand. So instead of sending a true or false value back, what it does is it creates a token out of the information that I have already sent to the server. I have already sent my username and password. What it does is it will cross-check with the database, whatever information that I really need, which is obviously my username, password, a big no to password. You should not be storing password in your client. So that's a big no. You cannot use password. Username, email, maybe uh, encrypted form of user ID if needed. All those things, all those information can be used to create a token. Again, that entire token will again be encrypted. So you'll get a big string, like which is like 32-bit or 64-bit string. You'll get it as a response. You just make use of that in that token, which is your JWT token, and store it in your local storage. So instead of checking whether it's a true or false, you'll just check whether the local storage has a token. That's all you do. By looking at the token, you will never ever, the client never ever understand whether it is Arun or whether it's Nanda or whether it's someone else. And client is not supposed to know that also. If the client needs any kind of information, it make a request to the API, it also sends this token along with it. Each and every request that hits the server, it will decrypt that token. And once it is decrypted, it will know that, okay, username is Arun, user ID equals so and so. So I have to get the information of Arun, not Nanda. That's how the entire circle is going to work with your web-based application. The client should not be knowing anything about your credentials, nothing. It's just a token. Even if you look at the token, you'll never ever understand anything. And that's completely up to the server to handle that. That's where JWT actually kicks in.
So normally it's always in the local storage.
Yeah, you can store the token in your local storage. I mean, instead of we storing like true or false, once we incorporate JWT into your server, instead of storing true or false, it will be the actual JWT token that you set into your local storage. And you'll check whether your is logged in flag or any flag that you're setting has a value. That's all you'll check for. Even if the client tampers anything into that particular value, your client will still understand the user's logged in, but doesn't matter. The moment that you click on any of the other links, this is a token, that the tamper token is the one which is going to the server. Once the server decrypts that, it won't be able to understand that user. So obviously, it doesn't yield any kind of response back to the client.
Well, how about if we have two users? We need to store two tokens.
You cannot.
We can?
You cannot. So it is as good as saying that you have one page or one browser, and I want to open two Gmail accounts.
Yeah.
Will you be able to do that?
Yeah.
You can by adding the add account. Normally, you cannot do that. That's just because Google is implemented some algorithm, and it just stores multiple users' information as key value pair.
Yeah.
Right. So normally, just try Facebook. It doesn't allow you to do that. You open Facebook in one browser. I mean, you open another tab. The moment that you type Facebook, it will immediately logs as the first person. It doesn't allow you to. Normally, you're not supposed to do that. I mean, you can. You are inviting trouble to your life. That's all it is. Basically, it has to be. I mean, it has to be really structured. The moment that you try implementing something like that, it is like a big thing that you're doing. It's not a simple thing.
Yeah.
Each and every request that it makes, it has to completely understand. Instead of taking token 1, it has to take token 2. So that's how it is. So that's where JWT kicks in. I'll show you how you do that. Is this clear? That entire picture?
Yeah.
Okay, that was my aim. Okay, so now even before going into JWT, I'm just going to just show you how exactly we can create or work with forms and validate forms using the Angular specific features, right? So let me just close this, and I'm going to quickly create two components. As I said, there are two different approaches that you can use to validate forms in Angular. The first one is a template-driven approach, and the second one is a reactive approach. So I'm going to quickly create two different components for showing you both the approaches. So I'm just saying ng component validation slash template. That is one component. And I'm going to create one more. I'm just saying reactive. So we created two components, one for showing template and the next one for showing the reactive approach. Let me just quickly link these things with the routing so that I can access it using the navigation bar. So where exactly is that? Okay, I have a navigation bar here. And one smaller device is when you work with Angular or any such frameworks like React, close all the tabs that is not necessary. Just keep open only the tabs that you're currently working with. Otherwise, you'll go mad. I mean, there are like hundreds of files, and it's really hard to keep track of the files that you're working on. So once you're done with it, just close everything and just even if you have to reopen again, do that. All right. So now let me just quickly create one link for template forms. I'm just calling template forms, and I'm going to create one more for reactive forms. Let's give this as template forms reactive forms. And let me just quickly create these two routings as well. So just copy this and put it here. And just say template forms. Oops. And let me just quickly create the other one for okay. So I linked both my components into my navigation bar, so I should be able to use that. Yeah, the server's already running. So let me just try login. Okay, this is my template form. This is my reactive form. So let's start with template-driven approach first. So this is where I have my template HTML. So and this. Okay, so let's start building a form. So I'm going to build a form that has option to enter user's first name, last name, email, and then gender. Okay, so the way that you can create forms within or by using the Bootstrap, what do you call that, styles, is by directly giving a div. And if you want to really organize your form in a better way, you can use one class called form-group. And if I want to like really show this, it doesn't make any difference here. It's just the same. So if I want to just show this form within a template or within a panel, so how can I do that? Instead of directly showing that as just a form, I want to group everything inside a panel.
We already have
Exactly. We already have created a higher order component which helps us to implement the panel. And we named it as, if you guys remember what that was. What? Panel box. Okay, so the selector will obviously be app-panel-box. And here I can just give a title for this. I'm giving panel-title. Let's give this as template-driven forms. I do have panel-body. Into this, we are going to start creating the forms. So as I said, you can just use parent container, which you have to give the class, which is form-group, right? And then within this, you can just give a label. That's for my first name. Right after the label, I have to give input type text box. I'm giving a placeholder. Let's say first name. That's it. So if I go back to this page, I'll see something like this, right? So obviously I have to wrap these elements inside a form so that I can validate it. And one thing that I definitely missed is the form tag. Okay, so how can I make this better? So if you guys remember, what class will I usually, or I usually give for the input elements? What is the class? Right, so the class is form hyphen control, and for label we have a different class called control label. If you save this, it makes a big difference than it was previous, right? So similarly, I can just copy and paste this for the rest of the fields. I can copy this block, put it here. That's for the last name. This is for the email, and this is for the gender. So obviously, gender needs two, like male and female. Just okay. So I'm just going to change this to last name, and this becomes email. To do the same thing here as well, it becomes last name. This becomes email, and this becomes. I have to put this within this, so it's not a text box, it's a radio button, and I can just give mail here, and it doesn't need a placeholder attribute. I can do the same thing for one more. Okay, and all I need for the last thing is a button where I can attach the event. So I'm just saying save. Let's give a class for this. I'm just saying btn hyphen primary. So this is how my form will look like. So we have everything. Why is it showing like this? Input type rate. Oh yeah, I don't need form control. Okay, so now it should be okay. Yeah, now it is perfect. So now I can just click this, everything is working. So now somehow I need to validate this form. So as I said, the first thing we can do is with the template-driven approach. And if you guys remember last class, I also told you when you work with template-driven approach, you are heavily relying on your HTML to control your validation, which means you're going to rely on your HTML5 required attribute to implement the required field attribute, required field validation. You can use pattern for matching your email validation. You can do all sort of things, right? So the first thing is, let's go into this. Let's apply the initial validation. So I'm just saying I want this first name to be required for sure. So I'm just applying required, right? I also want to apply one more validation on top of required, which is min length. I'm just saying I want to have the first name to have a minimum length of 5. I'm going to do the exact same thing for last name. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to put it here. But for email, it has required. At the same time, I also want to check for the, the pattern the user types in. So for that, you can check the format by using a pattern attribute. And here you're supposed to pass exactly regular expressions. So he knows regular expression more than me, so I'm not going to touch that. So I already have prepared one regular expression, so I'm going to directly use that. So this is a regular expression I'm going to use. Just going to just get this. I'm going to use this. Don't ask me what this means. It's just a pattern that helps you to validate email. I just got from online. I just got from Stack Overflow. I just copied the one which has the most rating, so hopefully it should work. Right, so yeah, we applied validations for this, and obviously I need the radio button also to be validated, so I'm just giving required for both. I'm just saying required here and as well as required here. Right, so now we have applied validations for every input, and now when I go here, you can see the button is still active, right? I can go and click on this button if needed, right? But I don't want to do that. I cannot, the kind of pattern that I want to implement is I shouldn't be able to go and click on this button if all the validations are like satisfied. So which means I should enter a value here, and that value has to be minimum 5 characters long. Same for last name. Email has to be a proper format, and one of these should be selected also, right? So how exactly you can do that? You can directly go into this, and first of all, one big thing that we really missed is an option to provide an option to read the values from these inputs, which is by giving exactly ng model. So I'm just giving ng model here, ng model, and I'm giving, let's say, first name, or let's just give this as user form dot first name. Let's copy the same thing for all the other. Anyways, we are giving this. So whenever you give ng model, you're supposed to give the name attribute as well. So let's give that also. Let's do it together. So I'm going to copy this, put it here. You should see the way that HTML grows when you work on this. Right now itself, it is getting a little over. So now let's provide the same thing for here as well as here. So now this becomes last name. This also becomes last name. This becomes email. Even this becomes email. This becomes gender. This also becomes gender, gender, gender. And for these, you're supposed to pass value. So this, since it is a radio button, so you're supposed to use values. So I'm just giving the value as male and the value as female. So now we are given almost everything that is needed for a form to really work. So now let's try to apply the validation. So as I said, I want to disable this button if the validations has not met, right? So how do I do that? So the way that you can implement is by getting the reference of this form that we have here. So if I can get the reference of the form, I can access few properties from it, which will help me to understand whether the form is completely valid. When I just say valid, it is free of like validation errors. And the way that you can do is by using a syntax which is completely Angular specific. You can use something called hash, and you can give a variable name there. So you can directly give something like, let's say, user form, and you can give ng form here. So you give this, and now I can use this reference right here to this button, and I'll use property binding. So I'll just say disable. That's a property that I'm going to bind. I'm just saying disable. Right. It's a directive. So I'm just saying disabled, and I'm just checking for ng form dot valid. If it is not valid, I want to disable this. So basically, it is when you apply those syntax, Angular is trying to get the reference of that DOM node, which is your form, and it is trying to get you one property called valid, which you can look for to check whether it's completely free of validation errors. So when you go back into this, now you can see that it is disabled. This is because your form does have some validation errors. So if I try putting all the values here for this and for this, and when I click this, the moment I clicked it, it became active. So if I give anything, and if I just get rid of first name, again, it goes back into the disabled state. And even if I provide a value here, it will be still valid. I mean, still invalid because it needs to have a minimum length of 5. So I'll just give 2, 3, 4, 5. It toggles the state of that button. Is that clear?
Yes.
That's not the end of it. So looking at this, it is being disabled, which means I cannot proceed. There is some error somewhere in my application, but I'm somewhere in my form, but I don't know what that error is. Obviously, I have to prompt the user by giving him messages saying that, okay, this is what your error is. Otherwise, he will feel that, look, I have given username, but still it is not helping me to proceed to the next page. Then it's just because you have not given the valid first name, which has to be 5 characters long. So if I give this, then it should work, saying that, okay, that error is gone. So how exactly can I show that? So again, within this, I'll provide a few more inputs. I'm just saying a div tag. Within the div tag, I'm just giving class alert -danger. And I'll just say, please enter first name. That's one error message that you can provide for your first name. And at the same time, you can also give one more. You can just give, please enter valid first name. The first error message is basically he hasn't entered anything. The second message is he entered something, but still it is not valid up to our rules, right? Same thing, I mean, okay, now if I go back into this page, you can see both the error messages here, right?
Yeah.
So how do I toggle this? I don't want to show both the error message at the start itself. The first thing that I have to show is please enter a first name. If he starts entering any first name, which means this thing is not valid anymore because he entered a first name, but it is not valid. So then I have to show the second error container. So basically I have to toggle between the state, depending on the state of that particular input. So how do I do that? You can definitely do that by giving if conditions here. And what if conditions you give here? Again, if you have to provide any kind of if conditions, you need to get the reference of this input. Just like you got the reference of the form, you can do the same thing for getting the reference of your input elements. Only thing you have to do is you just give a variable name with the prefix hash equals, instead of giving ng form, it becomes ng model because it is input. So all you have to do is, I'm just going to just break this down a little bit because it is too lengthy now. Let me just give this right here, and I'm going to give that variable name here. So I'm just saying hash first name variable equals ng model. So now again becomes a JavaScript variable. So you can use this variable to check the validity of that particular radio button. I'm sorry, that particular input text box. So here, if I have to show this, it has to be the required field error message if it pops up. So I can write star ng if first name var. You can check for one property called errors. And error is going to be an object. It can have multiple. So right now we are looking for two validations. First one is required field and the next one is minimum length. So you can check whether the error is actually required. Come on. And you can do the same thing for the second one. So in this case, it becomes not required, it becomes minimum length. So you can just give errors dot min length. So now it became conditional. So now if I go back to this page, you'll only see one right now. That is just because the first error message that actually failed, or the first condition that actually failed, was required. The moment I start giving some values here, if I just give p, the error message changed to please enter a valid first name. So if I just remove this, again becomes please enter first name. So if I give again, it becomes please enter valid first name. Is that clear? Let's do the same thing for all. Yeah, go ahead.
Why we use a pound sign?
Come again?
Pound sign in the first name.
That's basically a syntax that they follow. That's all it is.
So how it's changed the variable? We pass the ng model. So it's copy whole data of the ng model into that.
No. I mean, see, the ng model is a directive, right? So you're using that directive within a weird syntax, which is a combination of square bracket and parenthesis to come up with two-way data binding. So that doesn't mean that wherever you use ng model, the whole two-way data binding is happening there. ng model is just a global directive that Angular holds. So using that, Angular can think of doing anything. They can use that ng model directive to implement two-way data binding. They can even use ng model to get the reference of that current input. They can do anything.
So whatever we are passing in the first name variable,
right,
model has nothing to do with the
two-way data binding. No. So that two-way data binding we are already implemented here by using this. You understood?
So I can give any name into the ng model.
Here, yeah, you can. So if you look at this, these two variables are completely different. See, there is no syntax such as like if you give ng model value as first name, it has to be first name var. Nothing like that. You can give any variable name.
So first name var arrows dot required and min length.
Yeah.
These two keywords is the required and the min length we defined.
Exactly, within the input. So whatever required, whatever validations that you apply here, you can check for all those fields here. Depending on that, you can actually toggle the error messages.
But the required we can know if it is exist. But the min length, why can he check if the min length is a 5?
It is checking, right? It is checking only, right? Like if you right now we just look. Right now it is showing the required field error message. The moment I type something here, now the error message has changed to please enter valid first name. That means it was able to find that the error has happened because the value that you're given is less than 5 characters.
Yeah, but we didn't check if the length is less than 5. Whoever does the sentence.
You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. See, the moment that you apply min length is 5 and you're getting a reference of this input, Angular automatically reads the input reference and it will get all these attributes from that input, so that it knows that it has to automatically apply those validations.
So here is the min length is a beauty keyword here, right? It's the beauty.
You're talking about this min length or
yeah, min length.
that min length? That is basically an attribute. It's a valid attribute.
So
that's an HTML5 specific attribute, to be very distinct, to be very specific. See, the validations that came into HTML is as part of HTML5. You're able to use required. Again, it's a part of HTML5 that introduced.
If we want to add more validations,
you can do that.
We can do the custom.
You can. I mean, I don't know how you do custom validations, because if you have to do custom validation, obviously you need the support of JavaScript.
Yeah.
Right. So you cannot like really do it using this. You can, to some extent, you can do that. Like that is exactly what we did here for email. We just given required. At the same time, we came up with the pattern. So it's completely up to you. So you can do the same thing here also. You can exactly. You can say that like your first name has to start with ABC, no matter what. So you can give the regular expression, give the pattern there. So that also works. All right. So now again, if you have noticed one thing, if I refresh this page, even before me, I go and typing into the text box itself, I'm getting an error message, which is a bad thing to do, right? So I shouldn't be showing this error message right at the start. We're just telling the user like you are really wrong. Like it's kind of rude, so don't do that. So the way that you can do is you can just directly again use. That's the reason why I've given this container here. So what I'll do is I'll just write ngF. I'll just say write ngF, and I make the rendering of this whole container conditional. And to do that, what I can do is I can again use this reference, which is first name var. That's the reference of that input. And I'll just check whether first name var is valid. That's the first thing that I'll check for, whether it is valid or not, right? Basically checking whether it's valid. At the same time, I'm also checking whether the user has actually visited that text box. And how exactly you will get to know that? You can access one property called touched. So now, by checking that touched property, you'll come to know that the user has at least visited that text box once, or that input once. So now if I go back, I don't see this. But if I go and click on this, and now if I navigate out of, if I navigate out of this, come on, why is it? Oh yeah, sorry, it is not valid. First name, it is not valid, and then this. So if I click this, and if I move out, it immediately shows up that error message. So if at the start, it doesn't show any error message, I go and click on this, and I moved out from that text box without typing anything. So if I move out, I'll get this. Even if I go back and I start typing something else, again, it shows please enter valid first name.
Touch is more like hover.
What do you mean?
Like we are hovering on anything.
Not hover, mouse. Not even that specific event is called blur. Blur. It's not hover. Hover is basically just keeping mouse on top of this. That's hover. Blur is basically your focus is on one particular input and you navigate it out of that input. That's a blur event. That's exactly what is happening here. So again, it went back to this. So I can do the same thing for the rest of these input. Only thing I have to do is I just have to copy this, put it right here. That's basically for my last name. So only thing I have to just do is I just have to change all these things to last name. Yeah, I'll get into that. Let me just say last name variable equals ng model. So this, just like we check the valid property for the form, that is exactly similar for your input also. So you're making sure that your input is valid enough to proceed. That's all it is. It's just a property. Exactly. So whatever validation that you have applied, it checks for everything, and everything satisfied, then it returns true. Else it returns false. So I'll do the same thing for last name. So I'll just replace this here, this here, this here, and this here. We need both these things. So this becomes again last name, and this also becomes last name. And let's do the same thing for email, but email is slightly different because here, come on. Did I kind of missed anything? Because the structure seems to be different. Oh yeah. Okay, so now let me just copy this and put it here, and even let's put the same thing here as well. So this becomes hash email variable equals ng model. You can use this here, 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 and here, and here it is not min length anymore, it is pattern. That's for email. Hey Nanda. Yeah. I'm not sure Nanda which one I am using. Oh yeah, so can you use the other one for the time being on the mohan@matlabs.com? Yeah, just for today. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks, Nanda. Yeah. Okay, so let's do the same thing for this also, the last one, that is gender. So I'm getting rid of this because I only have one thing to check for in gender, that's just required, right? So let me just give here, that becomes hash gender variable, that becomes ng model. The same thing I have to give it for the second radio button because it's both are related. So I'm going to do the same thing here, and I can use the same variable here, here, and here. Please select gender. So this becomes please enter email and please enter a valid email. Right? So now let's see, let's go back into this, refresh the page. If I hover on this and I move out, I'll get this. I'll get please enter last name, please enter email. Without selecting the radio button, if I move out, I'll even get please enter gender. So let's start typing this. So I'm just giving, and you can see that it is still disabled. The button is still disabled. So if I give P 2, 3, 4, 5, it goes away. Similarly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doesn't work. So I have to give proper, and it goes. And if I select gender, it went away and it activated my button. So if you look at the way that your HTML has grown, it grows like anything because you're completely relying on your HTML to control your validations. And that's basically how you implement template-driven approach. Is that clear, everyone? Okay. So now when you click on this submit button, like obviously it is not submit. I haven't given submit. So let me just give type as submit. So if you give the type as submit, what you can do is you don't need event binding for this button. You can directly rely on the submit event of your form if type submit. So you can directly go here and just write ng submit, and you can call one function right here, just saying save user, right? And also the good thing about doing this way is you can actually pass the entire values here. So you can directly copy this and you can just say user form dot value, and you can also check for user form dot valid. So by doing this, now you have to create a function in your in your component, and that function does have this function has two different parameters to that particular function. So let's go and create save user, and it does have the first one which is data, and the second one is valid. So you can actually check whether the valid, check for the validity. If I'm just saying if valid console.log data. So now if I go in here, let's open the inspect element. Let's go to console. I have all the data here. So the data is directly available as a parameter to the function. Otherwise, what you have to do is you have to just go and create a variable here called user form, and then you have to write this dot user form dot value. Instead, directly into this function itself, you're getting the data as your parameter. You have all the data here. Just like touched, there are few more flags you can definitely use. Just look into that. There's something called dirty. There is something or something else. I really forgot about the flags, because I kind of really always use this flag. I just want to make sure that the user has at least visited once into that input so that I can start prompting him with messages. So I have used touched. There is something called dirty and there's something called pristine. There are a few more flags you can look into that for working with template-driven forms. Is that clear, guys? Everyone?
So
yeah.
we have a form and we have a button. The button type is submit.
Yeah.
And the submit button can combine this form automatically. We don't have to specify which button combine which form.
Basically, you're talking about nested forms.
Yes.
You're talking about nested forms. Mm-hmm. And you want to check whether, yeah, I mean, basically what really happens is if you work, to be very honest, I haven't worked with nested forms. I'm just assuming things, but I don't know. I don't even know whether it's a good practice to nest forms in HTML, but you can always try this. Let's imagine you have a huge form out of which you have 3 or forms nested into that. Mm-hmm. Each form needs to have a submit button in order to submit that particular form. If you don't want submit button, you can always control that using a button and just use event binding and then get it using the right. So I believe it should work. Like ideally it should work, but I don't know whether it's a good practice to nest forms in HTML.
I did not use the function.
I really had a bad experience when I used to do that because, to be very honest, I haven't tried it using Angular, but I tried it when I used to work with PHP. That time it was a hell. Lot of things to do, like when you work with nested form. The problem is the complete form is not in your control. Yeah. You actually have to control that using JavaScript, because in PHP the way that it works is you just have a form, you submit it, it directly goes into the server. It directly goes into the PHP script that actually helps you to parse the data. So in that case, if you're working with a nested form, you have to completely control that using JavaScript. You need to serialize that form. You can use something called, it's a built-in object in JavaScript called form data, and you have to actually push that into the form data and then again serialize it and then send it using your XML HTTP request. That's how I used to do, like when I work with JavaScript and PHP. Right. Okay. So now, can we move on to reactive forms? Are you guys saturated, or can I move? Reactive forms, not React. Can I go into that?
Yeah.
Okay. So now this is products, this is template. Now let's move on to reactive forms. Let me just open the TypeScript and the same thing, the HTML file for the same. So let's open the reactive. This is the HTML page and this is the TypeScript page. Okay, so then the way that template-driven forms differs from reactive forms is, as I said, the complete control, the way that you control your form is completely in your JavaScript end, not within your HTML end. So all the validation rules that you set, it will be completely from your TypeScript file, not from your HTML file anymore. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to completely reuse this. I'm just going to completely copy this and put it for my reactive forms page. So it looks ideal. So this is I'm currently in my reactive forms page. So let me just at least change the label to reactive forms so that you know that it is different. It's not forms, it is forms. Okay, this is reactive and this is template. Okay, so I'm trying to use the same template. I don't want to sit and create the entire thing again. Obviously, there are a lot of changes that you have to do in this. But even before getting into the template end, one thing that you have to know is if you want to work with the reactive forms, you need a different module altogether. So till now, to work with forms, we made use of one module called forms module, and you did update that in your app module, right? So that's when you really need two-way data binding features and all that in your application. But when you work with reactive forms, you're not working with two-way data binding directly. You're completely relying on the JavaScript object to come up with the form structure. So you need a different template, different module altogether, and that is called reactive forms module. just like you have forms module, you do have one more module called reactive forms module. And if you want to like really use the components of reactive forms, you need to include this in your app module. I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just saying reactive forms module from Angular / forms. And let me just include this in my declaration, sorry, in your imports. I'm good. So now I can use all the methods that reactive forms module offers. So let me just close my app module. That's pretty much enough. So when we worked with template driven, we directly created the form using the HTML, right? We directly worked with HTML to create most of it. The only thing that we did within your TypeScript is basically the event attachment and getting the value. But when you work with template driven, as I said, you're completely creating the form using the TypeScript file. So to do that, you need few components from, when I just say components, don't just confuse yourself with the components that we create. It's basically different things that you need from the reactive module. So the few things that you really need are, one is called form. Let me just say from Angular / forms. Okay, so the first thing that you need is form group. That's one. Second thing that you need is form builder. And the third thing that you need is validators. So if you really forgot about the imports that you really need, it's a good way to, first of all, give this where you're trying to import from. So if you just give import blank from, just give the path correctly, then the moment that you start typing itself, you'll get auto suggestions. Otherwise, if you directly start typing here, you will never get any auto suggestions because it doesn't know where to import it from. So even I didn't kind of really remember. That's the reason why I just give this first and then start typing the import statements. I mean, the things that I wanted to import. So it is helpful. Like, all right, so let's get into the business. So if you looked at this, so here we have different things, right? We created a form using a directory called ng form, right? That becomes your form group in reactive forms. Basically, you're creating a form as a group of different inputs. So you basically form your create your form. I'm just saying form your form. It's like create your form using form group, and within the form group you have different form controls. And if you look at your template driven, you have a form, and here you have different controls that you defined using again the hash. But in reactive forms approach, it becomes a form group. Within the form group, you have different form control, and your different form control will be one for first name, last name, email, and then gender. That's how it works. So let's start building your form. So I'm going to create a variable called user form itself, which is going to be of type form group. So I created a variable where I'm going to actually define my form. So I created a form user form variable, which is of type user form group, and I'm just using this variable within the ng on it. That's when I really build my form. I'm just saying this dot user form equals, I need an instance of form builder to actually build my form. That's a service. So I can just create an instance by putting that within the constructor. So I'll just say private FP, which stands for form builder, giving a new instance. So I'm just saying this dot FP dot group. This is a function that you use to create your form. And within this, you'll pass an object with key value pair, and each key becomes your form control. So I'm just saying I need one form control for first name. I'm setting the value as blank. And what you give as a value here, that's basically the default value that you want to set it. I won't want to set any kind of default value, so I'm just giving that as blank. I also want one for last name, setting it to blank again. Also want one for email, setting it to blank again. Also want one for gender, setting it to blank again. And that's pretty much enough for you to create a form using your reactive forms. Actually, a form object is ready. There's no validation that we have applied, but your form object is ready. And how exactly can you relate this object with your template? Let's go back to the template. So we have to get rid of most of the things that we wrote for template driven. So the first thing is I don't need this, the reference anymore. Let me just get rid of this also for the time being, just for clarity. And let's get rid of ng model because we are not going to work with ng model. Since ng model is not there, we also don't need the first name. So I'm going to get rid of that. Let the placeholder be there. And as I said, validations, we are not relying on HTML anymore. So let's get rid of the validation and also get rid of this instance. So most of the chunk has gone from your HTML. So we'll work with this block later. So let's do the same thing here also. For last name, I don't need ng model. I don't need name. Get rid of those. And again, I don't need these three things. Let's do the same thing for email. I don't need ng model. Name. I don't need validations. So let me get rid of all these three things. Let's do the same thing for this. So I don't need required. I don't need this. I don't need gender. I don't even need value. And I don't even need this. Let's do the same thing here also. Wait, I think I just need value, by the way. Saying value equals male and value equals female. Right? So now we got rid of most of the things that we need. And we also have this one. So now how exactly can I relate my form that I created with this form is by using a binding. And the way that you do is you just give form group equals, you give, just give this user form right here. You just bind that value as a property to your form by using form group. I'm a little confused whether should I give capital F or not. Let me just look into that. I have let me just very quickly look into that. Come on. No, it's just the same. Very good. Yeah, my memory is actually good. Okay, so now we kind of related the instance with the form. So now how exactly can I relate the properties that we created to the individual controls in my this thing? So now if I go to this reactive forms, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different properties that we mentioned within the form. So how can I relate these properties with these inputs right here? That's when you use one additional attribute called form control name. And you can just give first name here for first name. So now within the form, it is able to relate that property with that you just defined within your TypeScript. You can do the same thing for all the three. So you can just copy this, put it here for last name. So the form control name becomes last name. And when you give form control name, you're not supposed to pass the value for name attribute. It's already there. So just give last name. Let's give the same thing for email. So let's put this here, and that becomes email. And let's give the same thing for both. So this becomes gender. This also becomes gender. So everything is related now. The things that you created within your HTML and the things that you created within your TypeScript are both related, right? You define the form using form group that has been marked here, and individual controls are related here using the form control name. These things like that you do it using first name, error, required, and all that, we cannot do it because we haven't mentioned any kind of validations here, right? So let's, I don't know whether it will work. It might throw an error. Let me just see whether we have any error. Oh, we do have an error. Cannot read property valid of undefined. That is just because, where exactly is it? It is showing in line 7. Yeah, that is because of these things. That's okay. Okay, so now we don't have access to these variables called first name var and last name var and all that. So how do I get these references from? So if I want to get the reference, what you can do is you can just use this form, the form group variable that you created, and you can query that form group object by using a method called get. So you can just say user form dot get, and you can query the property that you want. So it becomes user form dot get, just pass first name. So you can do the same thing for this, this, and this. And you have to repeat the same thing for all the inputs that you have. And that's how you can convert very easily a template-driven forms to reactive forms approach. So here again, it becomes, let's say last user, let's say just change this to last name. And I can just copy this here, here, and here. Again, I can just use this for email. So this becomes email. I can put this here, here, and here. Let's do this here. So that becomes gender. Gender, gender. So now your form should be hopefully free of errors, and it is. So now your complete form is free of errors, and for some reason it is still showing user form disabled. Yeah, that is just because we haven't applied any kind of validations. So the button is still valid. That is because there is no validation to like check for, right? I'll show you how exactly you can do that. So now, as I said, you define key value pair. Key becomes your control property name, and the value becomes a value. So if you give any kind of value here, let's say I'm just saying Arun, save it, that becomes your initial value for that text box. If you go back, your text box now has a value Arun that's set. And you can do the same thing for everything. And you can do the same thing for email. You can do the same thing for last name, gender. If you give gender as male, the male will be selected. And the male is selected now. So that's how we can set the default value. And imagine if you want to give validations. So if I want to provide validations, what you have to do is instead of giving the value as the initial value, you tend to give an array here. You just pass an array. The first item of your array will be the initial value. And the second item of your array becomes the validators that you want to apply. And that's one of the reasons why I've just kind of imported the validators object here. So this validators object has almost all the validations that you really want to apply. So you can just use this and put it here. I'm just saying validators.require. So now your input has a field that needs to be validated, and that validation is just a required field validation. Now if I go back, you can all finally see that the input is disabled. So if I give any value to this, it becomes enabled, because it's just looking for required field validation, and none of the other fields has validation that is applied. Get rid of this, it becomes again disabled. That's how we can apply validation. So what if I want to apply multiple validations? Along with the required field, I again want to apply minimum length. You can give a comma, but the only problem is you can only take 2 items. So again, what you have to do is you just have to give the second item as an array. And then within that array, you can pass n number of validations you want. So it becomes validators.min length, and you're supposed to pass the values. I'm just setting that to 5. And you can do the same thing for last name because it is exactly same. So I'm just doing the same thing here. And I can also do the same thing here, but the only problem is it is not min length anymore for email, it is pattern, and you have to give the pattern there. I'll just copy it from here. Let me just get it from here. Oops. Here, and for gender, what? Yeah. Okay. So I don't need min length, I just need required. So I can actually get rid of the array here because I only had one validation to apply. So now we have applied validations for almost all the inputs that I have in my form. So let's go back into this. If I type something here, if I get rid of this, the moment I type, I leave the text box without entering any values, I have the error message that's shown. So if I give, let's say, P here, it just says please enter a valid first name because I have to enter minimum length of 5. So 2, 3, 4, 5, that's gone. Again, if I type something P, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's gone. Arun@gmail.com, that error is gone. If I click save, click on male or female, again, the button actually become active. So if I get rid of this, it again becomes inactive. It is disabled. Is that clear, guys? Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it with with reactive forms. There is one more small thing that you can actually do. You can also use conditional validations using reactive forms. Since you are completely controlled using JavaScript, you have the complete control on when to apply, what to apply, where to apply. So imagine in this case, let's say I have one more field here. I'm just going to quickly copy, let's say, the first name. Or let's do this. So let's go back into this page, and I'm just saying first name or last name doesn't need any kind of validation. I don't need any kind of validation. But I want to apply validation to the last name if I select male as a gender. Something of that sort. You cannot do that using template driven because it is completely on HTML. So if I click male, right now I don't have any validation here. But if I click male, this has to be validated. So how do you do that? To do that, what you can do is you can define a function here. I'm just saying update. It's just a function name. You can just say update validity. Update validity and just say a value. And I'm just saying if value equals male. If the value equals male, then I have to apply validation for my input, which is last name. So how do I do that? You can actually get the reference of the input element by just saying, let's say const last name control equals, kind of forgot. I think it is this dot user form dot get, and you can give last name. So this will get you the reference of the last name object or last name text box. Using this, you can actually set validations here. You just set validations like last name dot set validators, and you can pass validators dot require. Again, if you want to pass multiple, you can pass an array. Fine. And the moment that you do this, you're supposed to call one more function which will actually refresh your form, because it has to refresh that entire object of that form. So the way that you do is you can just say this dot user form dot update value and validity. That will just completely refresh your form so that the new validation that you just applied dynamically gets updated to your form object. So now let's see how exactly this works. So if I go back to this page, if I don't type anything for first name, the error actually pops up. For last name, it didn't. So let's try filling value for first name. I'm not filling any values for last name. I'm leaving it blank. So I'm just saying Arun at gmail.com. And if I select female, it actually activated my save button. If I click male, oops, did I got any error? Oh yeah, one small thing which I kind of missed is I created this function, I didn't call it anywhere. So I just have to call this on the click event of this radio button. So kind of really forgot about this. So just saying click. Here I have to just pass as male. I'll just do it here. Also just becomes click this, and this becomes female. So now that should work. Again, let's try entering values here. Not entering values for last name. I'm entering a value for email. I'm clicking on female. And I click female, then nothing show up. And I click male. Come on, still getting any error.
That shows 1 second.
Let me just check that again. This value, last name control, the strong form, not get. That is correct. is correct. Okay, let me just check my GitHub repository itself. What is happening? It's exactly the same. Oh yeah, so yeah. The problem that the mistake that I did is it's not the update value and validity should not be for the form. It has to be for the last name control. It should not be for the form. That's the only mistake that I did. So now it should work. Giving not value. Let's give a value for email. If I click email, nothing happens. If I click mail, it pops you or just warns you saying that okay, now the last name is actually valid. I mean, it has to be filled. If I click female again, it has to go, but for some reason it is not going. I don't know why. Oh yeah, else we haven't wrote any else case here. So what you could probably do is you can just use else case and you can just say clear validators. You just have to remove that validator if it is not mail anymore. So now it should work. Hopefully this should definitely work. So like,
you left the
for some reason not allowing me to complete the process. So let's try this. Okay, so now if I click female, it's not. If I click male, it is applying the validation. If I click this again, it just goes.
But the first time
But I did see that, but I am not sure why is it happening. I'll definitely look into that. It's the first time that I'm seeing this, to be very honest. I never seen that. Like when I click female, now it didn't happen. If I click male, it wants you for entering last name. If I click female again, it again becomes active and the validator is gone. Is that clear, everyone? So that's one big topic for you, like template-driven forms and reactive forms. But it is really interesting to work with forms. Right. Okay, that's pretty much I want to talk for today. So Monday, I'll definitely cover the topics which is JWT and few other topics on how to. We did cover the what? Oh, that is the one which I was just keep on talking about for 5-10 minutes. You'll understand on Monday.